Welcome back to the Wednesday night Bible study. We're looking at the story of Joseph. This is our 11th installment. We're in Genesis chapter 45. I'm calling this one Grace to the Guilty. So last time we finished chapter 44 of Genesis. Joseph has tested his brothers. What were their attitudes, their hearts toward God and toward others? We read at the end of the chapter 44, Judah showed they had grown. Now then, please let your servant remain here, Judah says, as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come upon my father. So now we continue the story. How does Joseph react to Judah's speech? Chapter 45. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him, because they were terrified at his presence. So isn't this one of the greatest moments in the entire Old Testament? I think so. The big climax to a story that's been building and building. So he cleared the room except for the 11 brothers, and figured that the brothers were trembling before him. Would this powerful man make Benjamin his slave? What if Judah's long appealing speech just angered him? Would they all become slaves or maybe killed? And suddenly, this powerful, second only to Pharaoh man breaks into tears. Not just silent tears, loud enough that those outside the room heard and began spreading the news. And then he tells them, for the first time speaking in Hebrew, "I am Joseph." And then the brothers react. It says they were terrified. Why do you suppose they were terrified? A trap? Vengeance about to happen, perhaps? Verse 4, then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt." So there they are trembling, and Joseph says, "Come close to me." The word that he used in Hebrew, nagash, means more than just spatial proximity of getting close. It means an intimate closeness, sometimes used for coming near for the purpose of kissing or hugging someone. So I think Joseph wanted two things: to get physically close, see his face, see who he was, their own flesh and blood, and to finally reunite as brothers. Seeing him up close might have convinced them, but the words he said made it for sure that he was their brother. They would have told nobody what they had done, selling their brother those 25 years ago. So the only way this man could know was if he really was Joseph. And then Joseph lets the brothers off the hook for what they had done. But he has a reason why. It says in verse 8, and now, Joseph is saying, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will not be plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to a Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. So Joseph here is showing grace to the guilty. The average person, myself included, might say something like, "I've been waiting all these years." But Joseph was not an average person. He was a person of God. He was fully forgiving his brothers. He said essentially, don't be distressed or grieved. It was God, not you, who made this happen. And God did it to preserve life, not only yours, but his chosen people. The sovereign Lord saw far into the future, saw the needs of this world, and chose me to be used to solve the famine problem of the future. You thought you were doing evil, but God worked outside your evil intentions. In verse 8, Joseph repeated that it was God who sent him to Egypt. It was God who made him ruler of all Egypt. God arranged it. Joseph knew it wasn't his own doing. How does this wisdom from Joseph relate to you and me? I trust our circumstances won't be as dire as Joseph has faced, sold into slavery, years in prison after being falsely accused, but it's part of the human condition to have troubles. And sometimes those troubles are brought on by others. But think about this. If you could see the hand of God in your life, when trouble comes, would you become angry or bitter or cynical or seek revenge or fill in the blank? That can be awfully difficult in the midst of the troubles. But as Joseph is able to do here, looking back, the hand of God can be seen. God permitted it for a purpose. Our goal should always be to give the glory to God, just as Joseph did. So Joseph forgives them, then explains things, reassures them. Then he makes them an offer they couldn't refuse. In verse 9, "Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there because the 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly.'" So Joseph urged them to return and bring their father back with them. Why? For their own survival. There were still 5 years of famine. Instead of holding grudges, he's being generous, gracious, supportive, merciful. Tell my... you heard all that already. Now we go to new here. "Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward his brothers talked with him." So this was a tender, loving reunion. What I call this, grace to the guilty. And they talked. Don't you bet they had a lot to talk about? They had about 25 years worth of catching up. I'd imagine every time the brothers brought up their wrongs, Joseph would change the focus to God's plans and God's glory. Let's see what Pharaoh thought when he heard what was going on. In verse 16, "When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'Tell your brothers, do this. Load your animals and return to the land of Canaan. And bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land. You are also directed to tell them, do this. Take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father and come. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of all Egypt will be yours.'" A very supportive Pharaoh, wasn't he? He was very encouraging. Give them the best of the land. He even seemed to be bending over backwards. Give them carts. Help them move. And why is all this from Pharaoh? Joseph had done so much for Egypt. Shows how much affection and respect the Egyptians had for Joseph. So, in verse 21, the sons of Israel did this. Remember, Israel is Jacob. Joseph gave them carts as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave new clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for his journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they were leaving he said to them, "Don't quarrel on the way." So they got new clothing, plenty to eat. They had all they needed in abundance. Carts provided to get everybody, wives, children, back to Egypt. I noticed that one directive Joseph gave them: don't quarrel. Don't get into an argument on your journey. I guess he knew these men, didn't he? They may have changed for the better recently, but human nature is human nature. Joseph remembered their antagonistic personalities, I think, and predicted some fighting. They were also suddenly richer, like they won the lottery. Sudden wealth can bring trouble, not to mention potential jealousy that Benjamin got more than his brothers. So they went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. They told him, Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt. Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. So keep in mind that Jacob knew nothing of what had just happened. The last time he saw his sons, he was wondering if he'd ever see them again. And remember, for the last 25 years, he thought his son Joseph was dead. Quite a shocker to see his 11 sons returning, loaded down with supplies and clothing. Not only that, but they give him the news that Joseph is alive. No wonder he was stunned. King James translates it as, his heart fainted. The literal Hebrew means his heart grew numb. He had a mild coronary, might be one way of thinking of it. Not so surprising that Jacob did not believe them right away. Interestingly, Jacob never believed them when they lied. Remember the animal killing Joseph? He did believe them when they lied. Now they're telling the truth and he doesn't. Maybe it's his personality that bad news is believable, good news isn't. But they convinced him. Jacob's spirit revived. And then the final verse of the chapter. And Israel, Jacob, said, I'm convinced my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. So now Jacob had only one thought, an objective on his mind. And what was that? To see his son Joseph. This is where we'll end. We'll stop here today. We do have one more to finish off Joseph's story. In the meantime, though, take care, be safe, and may the Lord be with you.